Welcome back to Veronica Live, and we are here with Scott McKay, and he has written a brilliant book called Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. And oh my goodness, the book is amazing. So, Scott, welcome to the show, and tell us a little bit about what you normally do besides being an amazing, best-selling author here.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be talking with you. I'm kind of one of these weird people who kind of bounced around and did a bunch of jobs, and then finally found my calling as sort of a writer and political commentator. Largely because every interaction I had with the government in my 20s and 30s was negative, and it was like, these guys are out to get me. And so I started a conservative blog called The Hayride here in Louisiana back in like late 2009, and have been doing it ever since. And in 2012, I started writing a column at the American Spectator, which has been a lot of fun because the Spectator was actually the first magazine I subscribed to when I was in college. And then next thing I knew, I was writing for it, I guess, all those years later. But
fabulous.
And then I've written a few novels, and I've written a couple political books. The first one was the Revivalist Manifesto, which I did in 2022, and it sold a little, and then it kind of came back to prominence after Mike Johnson became Speaker. Johnson actually wrote the foreword for the book, and
fantastic.
CNN decided to use it as a vehicle to attack Johnson back in like early December. And it went from it was selling a little to shooting up to the #1 spot on Amazon's comparative politics chart for like a week.
Excellent.
Which, made me some money. Yeah. So like everybody else hates CNN, and I'm like, well, I don't hate them that much. And I'm really hoping that they'll discover. I'm sorry.
Well, I was going to say, who knew you're such a troublemaker?
Oh, well, people have known I'm a troublemaker for a long time. But what I'm hoping is that CNN will discover Racism, Revenge, and Ruin and do a hit piece about that book. Because they'll hate it way more than they hated the Revivalist Manifesto.
Well,
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. Well, it's Racism, Revenge, and Ruin, and it's all about Obama. And Obama, reading your book is just such a dirty word, and he's still so involved in all of this nightmare. And normal people don't know this, Scott. So talk about your book and all of these Obama-isms that, I was reading all these stories again, and I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot about that. Oh, I forgot about that. Because we forget. And we're plugged in, and we forget.
Well, the thing about it is, a lot of people, and the book has a lot of history in it. It's not a history book, okay, because all of this stuff is still going on. And in fact, it's metastasized from when Obama was president. Whether it's the DEI thing, whether it's hollowing out the military, whether it's destroying the civil society, the war on faith, the war on cops, like all of these things really got started when Obama became president. And of course, this administration, this, Obama Redux thing that we have going on with Joe Biden, who everybody knows is not running the country. This is like the turbocharged Obama administration, with a different face on it. And he's the first president in the history of the country to choose to live in Washington, D.C. after he's supposedly done. Right? He goes and buys a mansion in Calorama, like a few blocks from the White House. And, you could make the argument he ran a shadow government when Trump was in office. And, whether it was the Russia hoax or at the very end of it, Jake Sullivan was like Obama's, his policy director, or I can't remember exactly what his title was, but he's an Obama guy, and he goes and organizes these 51 intelligence community spooks to lie and say that the Hunter Biden laptop story was Russian disinformation.
It's so disgusting.
Which essentially, that rigged the 2020 election. And of course, I mean, there were other things that rigged it as well, but and what you find out when you go back through the history is that rigging elections and not allowing the voters to have a free and fair choice is a hallmark of Obama politics, going all the way back to 1996 when his people invalidated the ballot petitions of everybody else that was running for the Illinois Senate seat that he was going after, including the incumbent, so that he had more or less, an uncontested election. And I mean, this has gone on in, 2020 or 2004 rather, when he ran for the U.S. Senate. His people got the divorce proceedings released on both his main Democrat opponent and Jack Ryan, who was the Republican nominee. And the Democrat opponent's campaign imploded. Ryan dropped out of the race. And so he went in largely unopposed in 2004 as a U.S. senator. And, so like we have this pattern of weird things that go on when Obama's running for something or when Obama's supporting somebody who's running for something. And so, like that's just one of the things that you'll see in the book, which is the ways that our institutions have been corrupted over the last 15 years at a level that had never really been done in American politics or culture or economics in the past. And we're a totally different country than we were back in 2007.
Yeah, well, Scott, this is the co-host, John. I was just wondering, one of the things that I've got an excellent book, by the way, and who is Obama's not that smart, okay? Michelle's not that smart. Who are the people behind this? And that's the one thing that I keep looking for. And same thing with Biden. Somebody's running this government, and I know these people think alike. They're all sycophants, so they kind of had the same herd mentality. But there's somebody pulling. Obama wasn't smart enough to go out and disqualify people. Obama wasn't smart enough to pick up the phone and get a judge to open up those records. Who are these people? I mean,
well, Scott, you mentioned in the book that Susan Rice, that Grinnell had mentioned, and we've had Ambassador Grinnell on the show here recently. He's a regular. That Susan Rice is the shadow president, and you mentioned that in the book. So is that who it is?
Yeah, I think Susan Rice plays a very large role in this. I think when the Obamas were in the White House, there's no question Valerie Jarrett played a very large role in, making decisions and maybe even telling Barack what to do. I think that there's a money component to this. Everybody talks about George Soros, but there's an entire network of, left-wing finance that has made an enormous difference in this country. And I think those guys backed Obama, and that was what changed the Democrat Party from being a Clinton party to a, hard left Obama party. So I think that there is sort of a corporate Barack Obama that, includes a number of people who have input. And I really don't think there's some grand conspiracy. Like you said, these people all agree with each other on everything. And it's not that Obama is so much that he's a smart guy. It's that he was really well trained. I mean, you can go all the way back. The book goes to a level of detail that will make your jaw drop on, who really raised Obama and who really implanted all of these ideas in his head is a guy named Frank Marshall Davis. This guy was a communist newspaper editor from Chicago, who one of the most anti-American slime balls that has ever lived. He was a Stalinist in the 40s and 50s. He was on the FBI's security index list because after he'd been run out of Chicago and moved to Honolulu, they found him photographing shorelines all over the Hawaiian Islands. And for no particular good reason, other than, you send those pictures to the Russians and the Chinese, and maybe they might want to storm those shorelines if we ever get in a war with them. And so the FBI had him on a list of people that were, go pick this guy up if we ever get in a war with the USSR. And as it turns out, Frank Marshall Davis was affiliated in a way that's not altogether savory with Obama's mother. And when Obama was 10, his mom basically kicked him out of the nest in Indonesia where she was living with this guy or married to this guy, and dropped him off in Hawaii with his grandparents, who brought him around to see Frank Marshall Davis, all through his teen years. And there are 22 references to someone named Frank in Dreams from My Father, which was Obama's original autobiography, which, oh, by the way, was ghostwritten by Bill Ayers. And we can talk about him a little bit in a little bit. But there are 22 references to Frank. It doesn't say Frank Marshall Davis, it just says Frank in the book. Those references were scrubbed from the audio book, which was produced, years later when Obama was a political figure with national aspirations. And Frank is this, wise old guy who basically craps all over America over and over and over again in the book. And when you see what Obama did as president, when you see the way he operated and how he addressed things like race and so forth, all of it comes back to things that Frank Marshall Davis wrote in all of those columns for those communist newspapers in Chicago and Honolulu that he wrote for 20 years. And so I'm not going to tell you, there are people who will say Frank Marshall Davis is Obama's biological father. I don't need to go there. What I will say is he's definitely his intellectual and ideological father, which means that this guy represents the Communist Party USA's agenda come to the fore in American politics.
Well, one of the things,
Party, that's for sure.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to ask you, Scott, when he was elected president, I was like, oh my gosh, we're finally going to be done with race, and it's not going to be a problem anymore. And it is the worst it's ever been, ever. I can't take it anymore. And then you talk, I love this, how nobody went to East Palestine when they had the chemical spill because it was a white community. It is the worst ever. And it goes. Well, your book lays it on his, at his feet that this is because of Obama.
Well, the book does, if I can, toot my own horn a little bit. The book does a really, really good job of pinpointing exactly how this country got baited and switched on race. Because, like Gallup, for example, does every June a survey on race relations in America. And in 2007, we were at the absolute zenith of race relations in this country. I mean, there had never been such good feeling between, black people and white people. And Barack Obama comes along. The Republicans had a very lackluster nominee in John McCain that nobody really wanted to vote for. And so he comes along with this value proposition that, hey, look, I'm a healer and I will make race go away as an issue in this country, right? I mean, he had a lot of high-sounding rhetoric, even though it was very empty based on his background, and folks couldn't wait to buy it because they desperately wanted to get race off the table. And, I mean, as soon as he gets elected, we find out what a lie that was because, you had this case in Philadelphia with the new Black Panthers, right, who were standing outside of a polling place with nightsticks, yelling at old white ladies when they came to vote, about how the black man's taking over and, get out of here, cracker, and all this kind of stuff. It was like the most blatant case of voter intimidation, since the Klan in the 50s. And so the Bush Justice Department gets started prosecuting these guys. But as soon as Eric Holder took over, that whole thing went away. And then you had the Skip Gates incident at Harvard, that ended up with the beer summit Obama said the police acted stupidly, right, and inflamed racial relations then. Then there was Trayvon. Then there was Eric Garner. Then there was Michael Brown. And then there was Alton Sterling. I mean, all of these cases. And in every single one of these, what you had was somebody who is not representative of the black community in America, was a career criminal, right?
Right.
Mostly
and now they're
victimized.
Saints.
Right, right, exactly. These guys victimize mostly black people, okay, and they get made out to be, these innocents, these saints, and of course that metastasizes into George Floyd, which was a very, very useful example for the Democrats in an election year. But all along the way, Obama tore down race relations in this country, using every opportunity he could, and used race as a wedge by which he could corrupt institutions and change the country in ways we would have never voted for. And now, racism has gone from a term that applied pretty specifically to offensive behavior toward people of whether they're black or whatever, to even talking about race is now considered a racist thing. And I'll give you an example. You'll probably remember this.
So true.
RFK Jr. Is doing an interview, or I can't remember exactly what the format was, but he was talking about COVID, and he said, okay, there's appear to be genetic markers for how this thing affects people. In other words, like, it really, really hits black people hard. It doesn't seem to hit Ashkenazi Jews or people of Chinese descent particularly hard. And he said the implications of this could be like military, which is scary, right? Like, that's what he said. From that, because of course he's running against Joe Biden, who represents the Obama machine. From that, he is then lambasted as anti-Semitic for saying this. And Debbie Wasserman Schultz, attacks him in this congressional hearing about censorship and, says, you hate Jews. And he's like, I never said anything bad about Jews. All I said was they tended to fare a little better on COVID, which is a fact. And we are so screwed up on race in this country as a result of 15 years of being, constant provocations, that
You're
something
right.
like this, which is utterly absurd, is brought to the table. And they use this. I mean, they are now hammering people who criticize Claudine Gay at Harvard for her nonstop plagiarism, right? Oh, you're a racist. And it's like, well, plagiarism knows no race. Like, this lady never wrote a book. She's got virtually no scholarship of her own to justify the position that she holds as the number one academic in America, right? And so you call that out, and because she's black, you're a racist?
I know. It's
that's
disgusting.
A totally different definition than anybody's used to.
Scott, you think, part of it, and I think it was Biden was the one that said, Obama was it, clean and articulate?
Right.
Of course,
right.
Nobody calls him on that, but kind of looking back in the, going back to the early 1900s, there was the eugenics movement, and there were a lot of black elites. And do you think this is a case of black elites versus the common blacks, or the I don't know how you'd want to refer to them otherwise, but it was like, with the eugenics movement, there were black elites that were actually in favor of what Margaret Sanger was trying to do with sterilizing and abortion of poor black women, particularly in the South, and it seems almost like that there's this level of black elite, and Claudine Gay is up there, all of these academics and stuff is where they're hiding at these days. But do you think that's part of what Obama, and particularly Michelle Obama, that's part of their mentality?
Well, I think you've opened up a rich can of worms with that question. There is a long history of that kind of back and forth within the black community, and where it really, I think, came to a head was 120 or so years ago, with the big debate between Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois. Washington was the preeminent black leader in America in, the Gilded Age, between the Civil War and, say, 1910 or so. And his message was, he wrote a book called Up from Slavery, and it was all about exhorting black people to go out and get marketable skills, right? Become the machinists and the farmers and get into the skilled trades and make yourself absolutely invaluable to the economy, and all of this racial stuff is going to start melting away. And his example that he took was, Jewish people, right? Which, who huge on education, develop skills that the economy needs, and they may hate you, but they're going to have to do business with you. And eventually, you can kind of eliminate some of the discrimination against you because you're valuable, and that was his message. And it was somewhat conciliatory toward white people, even though, Washington funded lawsuits on civil rights purposes, all these things. But his whole point was, we're not going to get anywhere if black people and white people are fighting. We need to cooperate. We need to move forward and all that. Du Bois, and by the way, Booker T. Washington was born a slave in Virginia. Okay. So you want to talk about, I guess, ordinary black folks, like he was an ordinary black folks type of person. W.E.B. Du Bois was the first black graduate of Harvard. He came from a fairly wealthy family in Massachusetts, studied in Berlin, where he learned Marxism, of course, and then came back and preached the exact opposite of Washington. He preached the talented 10th at the top of the black community needed to become political activists and seek political power for themselves, and then they would benefit the rest of the black community in America. And Obama was supposed to be the guy who kind of fused those two movements the way Martin Luther King did, except King's message was colorblind America. And Barack Obama's message is the opposite of that. In fact, there's an interview, I think it's from like 2005, when he was a freshly minted U.S. Senator. And I think it's from back in Chicago. And he's asked about this question of, the black community and social mobility and so forth. And he says, there's no such thing as individual salvation here. You can't have individual salvation without collective salvation, which is straight W.E.B. Du Bois. And what it means is the black community has to have, whether it's DEI or some of these other things, to elevate the entire group rather than just, individual families that move ahead and start a family business and do, all of the things that, for example, the Irish have done and the Italians have done and, the Koreans have done in this country. He rejects all that and he says, no, you have to solve systemic racism in order for the black community to rise, which is a very self-serving thing for a politician to say, by the way. And it also doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Well, what do you make of,
you can't.
What do you make of the effort to sell an entire generation of blacks? Education is everything, okay? And they seem willing to condemn generation after generation of blacks to miseducation or poor education in these big cities for the benefit of the unions and a few, elite blacks, particularly the ones that run a lot of these big cities. Why aren't they willing to sacrifice their own race?
Well, I have a thing that I call weaponized governmental failure. And it applies to what urban Democrats do in government. So if you run a city and you fill all the potholes in a timely manner and the schools teach skills that folks need and the cops keep, law and order and there's a tax climate that's conducive to people doing business and all of the basic things that we think would entail running a city successfully. If you do those things, what you're going to get a lot of is middle-class voters living in your city. And middle-class voters, particularly for a Democrat, are a pain in the butt because they expect you to continue doing those things. And that doesn't leave a whole lot of money or time to practice the kind of corruption that Democrat politicians want to do. And
so true.
true. a few decades ago, these guys started to realize, particularly like in Detroit, for example, when Kwame Kilpatrick, who was a rapacious crook, right? Nobody could beat him. He kept winning re-election every 4 years. And Marion Barry in D.C. and some of these other people who were just abject, horrendously awful mayors, like they couldn't lose re-election. And the reason was their misgovernance had run the middle class to the suburbs. And what was left was a thin skim of rich people who don't really care about a left-wing idiot running a city, because you can pick up the phone, you drop them a campaign donation, and then you pick up the phone and you can get the pothole fixed on your street, right? They'll do yours.
So true. Yeah, they will.
Right? And then, they send their kids to private school. They got private security in their neighborhoods. Like, you can do like an a la carte government if you're rich in a city. Right? It just costs a little extra, but you have the money. So what? And then there's no middle class, or a very small middle class, and then there's this vast swath of poor people that you can essentially, the Human Rights Committee and woke stuff, and basically what you do is you make excuses for bad behavior that leaves people poor, right?
Right.
And that's enough to get them to vote for you.
Well, final question though.
And these guys never lose elections.
Scott, final question, because you dedicate the book to the America we love and the devout hope she will reclaim herself. And then your final chapter is, please, no fifth term. And Michelle Obama is what everybody keeps talking about. They go high, or what is it? They go low, we go high. I'm petrified that they're going to throw her out there. So wrap up this interview, because when you say Michelle Obama, I run the other way. I don't go, I don't.
Right.
I'm like, please, we can't take it. I think she likes being a billionaire wife and going to Fashion Week and all of that. I don't think she wants to lead our country. So close us out on what you think 2024 is going to bring to America.
Well, I think my editor, Harry Stein, had a really funny thing. He said, every night when Barack finishes up watching whatever NBA game that he's watching, he comes to the bedroom and he says, "Oh, Steph Curry missed that 3-pointer at the end. Hey, are you going to run for president?" Right? Like that's Harry's story about this. He's talking to Michelle. They need her. Like, they need her badly, because the Joe Biden experiment is really, like, it's starting to generate very negative returns. Those approval numbers are awful. Those reelect numbers are absolutely awful. But the thing of it is that machine has got to have somebody as a loyal puppet, and their options at this point, if they can't continue with Biden, are Kamala Harris, who's a non-starter. Okay. Like that will not work. And I don't care what kind of fixing of an election they want to do. They can't drag her across the finish line. And that leaves Michelle. And I think you're exactly right. Michelle doesn't want it, and furthermore, you can't tell her what to do. And so they're in a little bit of a pickle here. A lot of people are talking about Gavin Newsom, but the thing about Newsom is his ego is bigger than Obama, and he's not going to be a puppet. And look, we talk about this in the book. I mean, we prove it in the book, okay? The Democrat Party is the Obama Party, all right? You are not going to be that party's nominee this year unless you are a loyal puppet of that regime, period.
So
and Gavin Newsom is way too big of an egomaniac to be somebody else's puppet. So I think all of this about Newsom is him angling to be the guy who picks up the pieces and puts that machine back together, under his own banner in 2028. Like, that's my theory, and I haven't seen anything that really shakes me from it.
Well,
so
Scott,
I think they're stuck with one of those three candidates: Biden, Kamala, and Michelle.
Oh my gosh. Well, we better win in 2024, but the book is Racism, Revenge, and Ruin. It's all about Obama by Scott McKay, and we have to have you back. This has been a wonderful, exciting interview, and the book's outstanding. So please, we got to have you back, Scott.
Thanks. Yeah, anytime, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining Veronica Live. And when we come back, we're going to have Andy Huzar. He's candidate for Bay County Sheriff, and we'll be right back.